When Tertullian argues for apostolic succession, he has a category that none of the traditions currently holding this view hold to today, that a church can be in succession with the apostles if they hold to apostolic doctrine. He says that even if they were not founded by apostles or apostolic men, what matters most is standing in the line of the truth. In the last video, I looked at the evidence for apostolic succession in Ignatius, and today I want to look at Tertullian for what he has to say on the topic. His arguments are similar to what we find in Irenaeus because he too was facing a polemical situation, that of refuting heretics. The key question is this: when Tertullian appeals to apostolic succession, is he grounding authority in a chain of ordination, or is he using succession as evidence for something more fundamental, namely apostolic doctrine? As we look at his claims, I think it's apparent he is doing the latter. In his work, Prescription Against Heretics, Tertullian deals with this in 3 chapters, 20 through 22. In chapter 20, he says this: "And after first bearing witness to the faith in Jesus Christ throughout Judea and founding churches, they next went forth into the world and preached the same doctrine of the same faith to the nations. They then, in like manner, founded churches in every city, from which all the other churches, one after another, derived the tradition of the faith and the seeds of doctrine, and are every day deriving them, that they may become churches. Indeed, it is on this account only that they will be able to deem themselves apostolic, as being the offspring of apostolic churches. Every sort of thing must necessarily revert to its original for its classification. Therefore, the churches, although they are so many and so great, comprise but the one primitive church founded by the apostles, from which they all spring." Tertullian makes the argument that the apostles received from Jesus what to preach, what to announce. They did so and propagated the same faith everywhere. Churches that adhere to this are apostolic because they all have this common source in the apostles and their doctrine. Tertullian has to answer the objections of heretics, and similar to Irenaeus, he confronts the idea that Jesus and his apostles held something back, or that it was delivered secretly to a few. He has several chapters where he addresses this, but here's a representative statement. He says this of the heretics, but at the same time insisting that they, the apostles, did not reveal all to all men, for that they proclaimed some openly and to all the world, whilst they disclosed others only in secret and to a few. Because Paul addressed even this expression to Timothy: "O Timothy, guard that which is entrusted to thee, and again, that good thing which was committed unto thee, keep." What is this deposit? Is it so secret as to be supposed to characterize a new doctrine? Or is it a part of the charge of which he says, "This charge I commit unto thee, son Timothy"? Clearly, Tertullian is not having the idea of a secret tradition. He's insisting that apostolic doctrine was both public and full. In chapters 26 and 27, Tertullian excoriates those who hold this view of a secret tradition. I'll just provide one representative statement from chapter 27. "Since, therefore, it is incredible that the apostles were either ignorant of the whole scope of the message which they had to declare, or failed to make known to all men the entire rule of faith, let us see whether, while the apostles proclaimed it, perhaps simply and fully, the churches, through their own fault, set it forth otherwise than the apostles had done. All of these suggestions of distrust you may find put forward by the heretics." In a previous video, I spoke about the rule of faith in Tertullian, and I showed that he includes the basics of orthodoxy, theology proper. God is the creator of all things. He has sent his Son, born of a virgin, who suffered, died, and rose again for our salvation. In that rule, he includes what he deems to be the essentials of Christian belief. The rule of faith appears earlier in the prescription against heretics in chapter 13. You can see that his targets are those heretics, the Gnostics who denied the deity of the Son, or others who said that the God of the Old Testament is not the God of the New Testament. All of these things the heretics held to, but Orthodox Christians affirmed the deity of the Son and that the God of the New and Old Testaments is the same God. So if one were to ask who determines what counts as apostolic teaching, Tertullian doesn't appeal in that rule to an infallible institutional mechanism to align. He says this rule, as it will be proved, was taught by Christ and raises amongst ourselves no other question than those which heresies introduce and which make men heretics. What Tertullian teaches in chapter 32 here presents a challenge to the later view of the development of doctrine. Remember that one of the claims for apostolic succession is that it developed over time. In previous videos, I've cited Father Francis Sullivan as one who acknowledged that, yes, we don't have a defined doctrine of apostolic succession in the New Testament, but that later history and theological reflection allows us to get there. In other words, those who want to use Tertullian to bolster the claim of apostolic succession have to confront the whole scope of his ideas. That is, he ridicules the claim that the apostles didn't deliver everything that was necessary for the faith. For him, it was not only complete, but sufficiently clear and public to function as a standard of judgment in his own day. Now, I'm aware that many argue that even if a fully articulated doctrine of apostolic succession isn't here in Tertullian, they'll say it's implicit. But Tertullian's writings are not the New Testament, and to appeal to later writings for proof of something essential to the existence of the church falls far short. Given Tertullian's own stance toward the idea that the apostles didn't fully reveal what is necessary, his argument leaves little room for the idea that essential doctrines were there in seed form and only clarified or established later. For him, the apostolic teaching was already public, complete, and sufficient. Tertullian, like Irenaeus, is interested in a chain of custody kind of argument. The apostolic doctrine was delivered fully and completely to the 12 by Jesus, and the apostles, in turn, delivered it fully and completely to the churches. Earlier, we looked at chapter 20, where Tertullian used the phrase seeds of doctrine. The seed imagery is tied to church planting and propagation, not to any internal, slow doctrinal maturation from vague germs to a later defined dogma. The substance of the truth was there as something already sufficiently clear to serve as a standard of judgment. But how far does the succession argument actually extend for Tertullian? He himself tells us. Tertullian does challenge the heretics to produce their role of bishops, saying that the true church can do so. Succession is evidential for him, but it's not ultimately decisive. His foundation is still the truth, where it is known and preached. This becomes apparent in chapter 32 of the prescription. He challenges the heretics that they don't have the true doctrine. For their very doctrine, after comparison with that of the apostles, will declare by its own diversity and contrariety that it had for its author neither an apostle nor an apostolic man. In other words, we know you're not true in your teaching because your teaching doesn't agree with that of the apostles. But then he goes on to say this: to this test, therefore, will they be submitted for proof by those churches who, although they derive not their founder from apostles or apostolic men, as being of much later date, for they are in fact being founded daily, yet since they agree in the same faith, they are accounted as not less apostolic, because they are akin in doctrine. Now, it is true that Tertullian challenges the heretics to prove their pedigree. He says, let them produce the original records of their churches. Let them unfold the role of bishops. Succession is not irrelevant to him. He uses it as one piece of evidence, but his own text shows us which criterion is determinative when the two come apart. Doctrine wins. We need to park here for a bit and contemplate what Tertullian is saying. First, he's talking about churches that he says can't demonstrate they were founded by an apostle or apostolic men. He's saying that new churches are springing up all the time. Does he insist these churches cannot be legitimate because they can't trace their lineage clearly back to the apostles? He does not. In fact, he goes on to say that they are not less apostolic because they agree in the same faith. They are akin in doctrine. This last phrase in Latin is consanguinitate doctrinae, or consanguine in doctrine. Consanguine means sharing the same blood. Now, someone may assert that for Tertullian, succession and doctrine are inseparable, that the churches preserve the truth precisely because they stand in the line of succession. But here in chapter 32, when he actually tests competing claims, the decisive issue is not the existence of a succession list, but whether the teaching itself agrees with what the apostles publicly delivered. This is a difficult argument for one who insists on an unbroken chain of ordination by the imposition of hands. Tertullian is presenting the lineage of doctrine as the ultimate test of apostolicity and truth. This is, in fact, what Protestants have always said. It's less important to show your papers than it is to confess the apostolic truth. That truth, says Tertullian, was delivered whole by the apostles. And just as in Irenaeus, we see in Tertullian that he uses apostolic succession as a polemical tool, a means of epistemological faithfulness. But he goes beyond what Irenaeus says to insist that even if a church can't demonstrate they are formally in the line, they can still be apostolic by holding to the truth of apostolic doctrine. This becomes clear in the last sentence of chapter 32, when he says, "Nor are they admitted to peaceful relations and communion by such churches as are in any way connected with apostles, inasmuch as they are in no sense themselves apostolic, because of their diversity as to the mysteries of the faith." Why are the heretics and their churches not admitted to peaceful relations with apostolic churches? Because they can't show their pedigree? No, because of their diversity as to the mysteries of the faith. It's the truth that separates them. Also, Tertullian doesn't develop an explicit doctrine of sacramental validity tied to succession. That more developed framework only emerges with Cyprian. The other factor with Tertullian is that he proves an uneasy witness for anyone wanting to claim him in support of apostolic succession. Later in his life, he made a move into Montanism, which, depending on one's viewpoint, may mean he left the church that claims his view. Some historians and scholars believe he never left the Catholic Church, the universal church. Others say that the Montanists were a sect, a schism. No doubt the Roman Catholic Church would say that Tertullian made a mistake, but this proves too much since Tertullian himself had been the defender of succession and still found it insufficient to arbitrate his later questions. The same Tertullian who once argued that the Catholic Church's continuity guaranteed truth later judged that fidelity to the apostolic message could override deference to any institutional line. What then do we learn from Tertullian's appeal to apostolic succession? He certainly uses it against the heretics, saying they cannot trace themselves back to the apostles. But the force of his argument does not finally rest on lineage, but on doctrine. It is the content of their teaching that exposes the heretics as non-apostolic. And crucially, Tertullian has a category for churches that may not have a direct historical link to the apostles or apostolic men. Churches without demonstrable succession are not less apostolic if they share the same faith, while those with claims to antiquity may be rejected if their teaching departs from that faith. In Tertullian, succession points to the truth, but it is the truth itself that ultimately determines apostolicity.